Hello, and welcome to our session, Stand Up and Be Counted, Using Data to Build Island Resiliency. I'm Megan Grable, a Community Development Officer for the Island Institute. Today, I'll be joined by Suzanne McDonald, a Senior Community Development Officer for the Island Institute, and Andy Dorr, Town Manager of the Island of Vinalhaven. First, I'm going to start out with a couple of housekeeping notes. In order to let us know who's on the call today, please visit and answer the polls. The questions are, where are you joining from, and what sector do you work in? Please use the chat box for chatting during the session. Keep an eye out for our colleague, Andy Theriault, in the chat box, as he'll be sharing relevant links and resources there. We've reserved time at the end of the talk to answer your questions, so please send them in as you think of them. You can also find a number of resources related to this presentation on Pathable. Thank you for attending today, and I hope you find something valuable in the following discussion that you can apply to your practice. When I left school, I was under the impression that all of my interactions in communities could be neatly put into frameworks and structures. This assumption on my part was surprising because during my graduate career, I spent every semester working with community groups and participating in projects outside of school. One such project was assisting a consulting firm with the visioning process for the comprehensive plan for a major American city where I was living and working. The whole process felt forced and fake. At the time, I couldn't describe why, but now, after working at the Island Institute, I get it. This firm came in from a different part of the country with an out-of-the-box solution that was supposed to guarantee a truly participatory process, with charrettes and all. Unfortunately, the consultants were so committed to their perfect solution, there was no room for actually including the input gathered during the participatory process. The natural, messy, organic process of citizen involvement was forced into the appropriate boxes of the framework, and what didn't fit was simply thrown out. In retrospect, this seems like a waste of time for everyone, and the experience tainted my view of the likelihood of ever having a truly participatory process. But now, after working with the Island Institute, I have repeatedly seen it happen. Today, my peers and I will be sharing personal stories with you about our work in data collaboration with communities. We'll be sharing personal stories with you as a way to show you the unique way we do data analysis in and with communities. It is not at all based on established frameworks and overwrought conceptions of perfect methodologies. These stories will help us explain what we have found to be particularly illuminating, as well as some pitfalls to avoid. While the Island Institute works in 120 island and coastal communities in Maine, our stories today focus primarily on one island town, Vinalhaven, where Suzanne, my coworker at the Island Institute, has worked alongside the community for many years.
Thanks, Megan. Good afternoon, good evening, perhaps good morning to all of you. Thanks for joining this session. We're excited to have you. So as Megan said, my name is Suzanne McDonald, and my story starts with my first day of work at the Island Institute back in 2009. It was the day that the tree cutters arrived on Vinalhaven. 10 months earlier, in 2008, the members of the Fox Islands Electric Cooperative, the community-owned utility that provides power to the islands of Vinalhaven and nearby North Haven, both 12 miles out to sea, had voted an overwhelming 382 to 5 in favor of developing the 4.5 megawatt Fox Islands wind project. This $14.5 million project was a huge undertaking for these two islands, which have a combined year-round population of just 1,500, according to the census at least. And some islanders had a hard time believing that it would actually be built. That was until the tree cutters drove off the ferry that day and began to clear the site. High electricity costs are common on islands around the world, including here in Maine, where some of the island communities along our coast can pay up to 70 cents, 70, per kilowatt hour for power. Vinalhaven and North Haven are connected to the mainland by a submarine cable, but faced higher and more volatile electric rates as a small consumer-owned island utility. Just as is the case in other remote locations around the world, the solutions to energy challenges and other complex issues facing small communities aren't always easy to come by. How can a community get the information it needs to make informed decisions if they don't have a resident expert in electrical engineering or renewable energy financing? How can a small island community effectively place itself in the context of other similarly situated communities if it doesn't have access to usable data to explain itself to the rest of the world? Enter the Island Institute. The Island Institute is a community development organization that has been partnering with island and coastal communities in Maine and beyond for more than 37 years. The coast of Maine is tucked up in the northeast corner of the United States, with Boston a few hours to our south and bordering Canada to our north. Believe it or not, we have the nation's fourth longest coastline, with thousands of small islands within 20 miles from our shore. In the early 1900s, more than 300 of those islands had year-round populations. Now, only 15 do. At the Island Institute, we focus on building resilient leaders to support thriving communities in confronting an increasingly changing world. We partner with local leaders to tackle infrastructure-related issues like affordable energy, expanding access to broadband, and preparing for sea level rise. We collaborate to develop and then share scalable solutions for critical facets of the community, including small schools, small business owners, and municipal officials. The type of technical assistance we provide is grounded in efficiently solving real-world complex problems. We work hard so that our analysis never sits on a shelf collecting dust, but is immediately put to use to get stuff done. Through close collaboration, ensuring that there is skilled leadership and local ownership, we work alongside communities to develop solutions to the issues they are facing now and will in the future. We use our storytelling strategies, which include convening a whole suite of publications and policy advocacy, in order to help those on and off island to better understand the challenges and opportunities facing our communities. On Vinyl Haven, we supported the Electric Co-op to develop a first-of-its-kind financing model for the project. We supported efforts to translate complex technical and financial elements of the project through a variety of community engagement strategies. After months of working with vendors and contractors to understand the realities of an on-island install, we supported the complex logistics of things like transporting turbine components across the bay by barge, and then landing them with the tides on the Vinyl Haven Town Wharf, and then transporting them to the site on the island's narrow and windy roads. The project finally became operational, and as is almost always the case, especially on islands, it was not without unexpected challenges. Again, we partnered with the co-op to provide technical assistance and data analysis that played an important role in helping the community to understand options around noise mitigation and rate impacts. In the 11 years since this project was built, I've seen this dynamic play out time and time again along the coast of Maine. How do communities access the data they need to make informed decisions about their future? How can we use data to help tell the stories of communities, sometimes so small or remote that they are disregarded by decision makers? And how do we make their realities easier for those from away, as we call them, easier to understand? How do we effectively support local leaders to grapple with the same complicated issues that major metropolitan areas face, but with a fraction of the staff, and have difficult conversations about the future with their neighbors? As an organization, we knew that better integrating technical assistance and data analysis into our work has to be a part of the solution. We knew, though, that we lacked the ability to adequately describe the coast of Maine from a quantifiable perspective due to limitations in the data. As many of you may know, small populations pose problems for data analysis because statistical methods to provide anonymity are difficult to apply, and instead data are often suppressed. Also, anomalies like poor response rates and outliers are easier to hide and smooth out in larger populations. So about 4 years ago, we decided to make a major investment in the Institute's capacity to provide data analysis support. And we're excited to share with you today how we are putting it to work to affect change in our little corner of the ocean.
So this data strategy was the beginning of my work for the Island Institute. Almost 2 years ago, after finishing my graduate work, I was looking for a job where I could apply what I had learned during many years of school to real-world problems. Many of my peers were looking for jobs in academia, but I felt compelled to work with communities to learn from them what it looks like to tackle big challenges. About the same time, the Island Institute had posted a job titled Community Development Officer, Data Analytics and Translation. It's a mouthful of a title. But the description for the position led me to believe that the Institute was looking for a data analyst who could do basic number crunching. But I knew I could bring an additional set of skills and talents to the position. I applied, won the job, and moved my family from the Midwest to the mid-coast of Maine. Working at the Island Institute has been a constant learning experience, which is a wonderful opportunity for anyone who enjoys growth and new challenges. The Island Institute data strategy is to embed our work in work that is already taking place. Some researchers work based on their personal interests and academic training, pursuing whatever topic is most suited to their specialization. At the Island Institute, we work differently in our data research. If a question is repeatedly coming up from multiple communities, we investigate it from the data angle. If a community is pursuing a project, we apply a data lens. If there is a topic that affects many of our constituents, we gather data and weigh in. Our goal is to add value and new insights to ongoing conversations and work. Our data analysis is not undertaken for the sake of doing cool research projects or because the idea sounded neat. The foundation of our data work is set by our community and state-level partners. Collaboration with these groups ensures that we are asking the right questions, pursuing topics that matter to the community, and accurately representing the community's vision for itself. Through this work in and with communities, we noticed that something was missing. Collecting, cleaning, and analyzing data is time-consuming and takes someone who knows how to do it and where to get the information. While the products of this type of work could be extremely useful to communities, it was more than most could tackle. This is where the idea for creating a biannual data publication began. The Waypoints brand was launched with the first edition titled Waypoints, Community Indicators for Maine's Coast and Islands. This was meant to be a general look at the coast with some basic demographic and economic information. The second edition, titled Waypoints Livelihoods, focuses on how individuals who live on Maine's coast and islands earn and make a living. Some exciting information on self-employment and types of occupations were explored in this edition. In our latest edition, Waypoints Connect, indicators are presented on physical, economic, and social infrastructure. This edition examines the connections between people and the systems that support living and working along the coast. The Waypoints brand puts collected, cleaned, and analyzed data into the hands of community members. The benefit of this work is twofold. All of the analysis is wrapped up into a visually appealing, easy to understand data report. Secondly, the underlying information processed to create the final publication is available to our communities for their use with the support of the Island Institute analysts. In this way, the Waypoints brand has become the cornerstone of our data work. We listen to what communities are talking about, develop a publication, make the data available for use, and make ourselves available for questions or inquiries about this data or other data. From these questions and inquiries, we begin to form the next cycle of the publication. This image is a simplified version of the first data spread from the third publication, Waypoints Connect. We always use this Maine at a glance spread as the opening data spread to help situate people to the Maine context. Situating people to the Maine context is very important before diving into the other data spreads for both people from Maine and for those from away. The publications are an opportunity to hold a mirror up to Maine to show our local, state, and regional leaders Maine through a data lens. Some important context about Maine: Maine's median age is the highest in the country at 44.6 compared to 37.9 for the United States as a whole. Maine is the most rural state in the nation with 61% of residents living outside an urban area. Maine is made up of many small towns, with 25% of island and coastal communities having fewer than 750 residents. Maine's coast and islands have an unusually high number of households who depend on self-employment income. These quick statistics help inform the other discussions the rest of our data publications spur. For example, when we testify at the state legislature, not all of our legislators know all of the communities intimately. The statistic on the number and size of small towns along the coast helps situate the discussion of capacity and resources for legislators. Understanding the limited capacity makes it easy to understand the difficulty of asking very small communities to assume a burden that might be easy for a moderately sized city. All of our data work is done alongside our community leaders. Their lived experience and local knowledge guides and informs our data strategy. Being a data analyst in community development, at least at the Island Institute, is not about being a distant expert. It is about forming relationships with community members and using their insights to better understand the data work. The community data work for the Island Institute is about looking at data sets in new ways, or presenting never before seen data sets and using compelling visualizations and storytelling to help Islanders make decisions about local matters and to see themselves in the broader context. I have gotten to work on many exciting projects and form relationships with many people in my short time at the Island Institute. One of my most enlightening and rewarding experiences has been working with the community of Vinyl Haven and its town manager, Andy Dorr, on multiple data collaboration projects.
Thanks, Megan. And it's been great working with you and your colleagues. So just a little bit maybe about myself and how one gets to Vinyl Haven, or how I found myself in Vinyl Haven. Like many graduating college, I found myself asking the same question, what now? As I finished up an internship conducting a greenhouse gas inventory for a small community in central New York, I came across a job ad that simply asked, do you want to live on an island in Maine? Although I never knew there were year-round islands in Maine at that time, they had me captivated at the thought of moving to Maine in of itself. The job was working with a community accessible primarily by an hour and 15-minute ferry in Maine's Penobscot Bay to update the comprehensive plan to the Island Institute's Fellows Program. The nature of this work allowed me to learn about Vinyl Haven through a very different lens, that of land use planning. Within the first 2 years, I had met many community members throughout the work, as well as through personal experiences. Stats, numbers, maps, data collection of all kinds were at the core of the plan. I learned that Vinyl Haven has nearly 1,200 people by the 2010 US Census, with an estimated summer population of over 3,000 on any given day. Looking at maps of the island based on ownership showed me that over 60% of the taxes paid were from property owners that did not call Vinyl Haven their primary residence. The plan also pointed out that 40 to 50% of the island was directly or indirectly employed by the lobster industry. Looking back, I can recall someone saying, hey, it's just 2 years. Perhaps that was their way of convincing someone to start fresh and to move to an island, but that was in 2011. Today, I serve as a town manager, and I'm grateful to be working alongside the many volunteers and my colleagues as we address some of the challenges highlighted in that comprehensive plan. To give you an overview or a visual of the island, I'll take a minute to watch this short video. I just wanted to share that this video was produced by the Island Institute as part of its Waypoints community profile series, and it's a great example of how we can merge data with video to help tell stories about a community. I'd like to just dive right into some of the challenges and opportunities we have. One of the biggest ones we're facing on Vinyl Haven right now, and that's sea level rise. And the comprehensive plan was approved in 2014. Sea level rise was merely mentioned and simply recommended that a committee begin discussing the challenges. On the heels of FEMA's flood insurance rate map changes, and in part because of those changes, in 2016, our Board of Selectmen commissioned the Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee. They began meeting and developed a mission statement to understand and assess threats posed by sea level rise, storm surge, and other flooding events, and to educate and inform about resiliency actions. Fast forward nearly 4 years, and we are fully immersed in trying to understand the potential impacts our community will face in the future. Various grants from Maine's coastal program, as well as the Island Institute, have helped us produce significant data and recommendations for next steps. An engineering study looking at flood scenario probability and the feasibility of adaptation options. A design and resiliency team that helped envision changes to our downtown area that incorporate economic, social, and infrastructure resiliency. A climate adaptation plan to protect our sewer system from inundation. A community process that saw us work through Maine's flood resiliency checklist, brought stakeholders to the table to identify flood vulnerability across the island. And most recently, we completed our downtown master plan, which emphasizes improvements to our downtown and business corridor that will increase resiliency. Currently, the committee is partnering with various groups and nonprofits to continue their work on the island, to help keep this work moving forward, and to help us make sure we are engaging with the local community. We applied for a Shore Up grant through the Island Institute. This has allowed us to support a staff member to assist the committee as they continue to take steps to address flooding roads and properties, migrating wetlands and marshes, threats to our drinking water supply, and solutions to minimize long-term impacts to our tax base.
Vinyl Haven is not alone in that the effects of sea level rise are a difficult challenge for a small community to address. Vinyl Haven is one of a handful of communities who have actively and doggedly continued to work toward a solution to the effects of sea level rise. One of the biggest stumbling blocks for communities is making the case for the large sums necessary to implement adaptation and mitigation measures. Through discussion, better understanding, and ongoing conversation with local, state, and federal partners, more and more individuals and groups are recognizing the urgency and difficulty of this problem. As a way to move this work through, data analysis by the Island Institute was undertaken on an economic impact study. The study was an analysis of the cost of doing nothing. What would it cost a community if no action was taken to combat the effects of sea level rise? In order to be generalizable to many communities along the coast, 3 communities were chosen that were representative of the struggles being faced along the entire coast. Vinyl Haven was chosen as the island example because their work in this area already demonstrated their awareness and eagerness of community members to work on the problem. With the support of the Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee, we began the data analysis to understand what the cost to the community would be if sea level rise was left unchecked. The study focused on the loss of property value due to flooding and related reductions to the tax base, the loss of commercial and residential buildings, the risk of the loss of jobs because of the commercial buildings becoming unusable, the risk to the tourism economy of Vinyl Haven because the central business district is located in a very low-lying area, and the rising sea levels are making the ferry transfer bridge unsafe for use during extreme events. One part of our analysis involved a field survey by dedicated members of the Sea Level Rise Committee. I printed maps showing the building footprints, and committee members with intimate knowledge of the island circled the footprints that were representative of the fish houses. I then overlaid the sea level rise projection on the maps and found the number of fish houses likely to be inundated at that projection. Fish houses are a key piece of infrastructure for individual fishermen. This image shows the mid-coast of Maine. Given 6.1 feet of sea level rise, a scenario that is likely to happen by 2100, This map shows the percent of land that would be lost in each community. In red, to the right of your screen, you can see the Cranberry Isles, which will see over 20% of their land become inundated. And then here in orange, toward the middle of the image, is Vinyl Haven, which will experience flooding to about 11% of their land. There are more maps and information contained in the story map about the findings of the economic impact study. This story map platform being used to communicate the information has been particularly helpful. Story maps are meant to be interactive and played with, giving people information but allowing them to explore the parts that interest them the most. The style of presentation also allows for continual development and editing. Instead of being a static report that can never be changed, this tool can be updated. Being able to edit it and having it available on the web has allowed for continued engagement with the Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee. Please go and check out the story map. There's a lot of interesting information and more maps to play with in it. The work with Vinyl Haven has helped inform our data strategy on what is pressing information for many of our coastal communities. Like I said, Vinyl Haven is not the only community struggling with the effects of sea level rise. Being informed by this localized context led to broader understanding of sea level rise along the coast from a data point of view. As we are developing our infrastructure publication, the sea level rise work has been ongoing. It was tricky at first to find the right angle to include a broad statement on sea level rise along the coast, but one of our partners, the Nature Conservancy of Maine, have been developing an interactive web-based map showing roads and addresses that would become cut off to emergency services given different projections of sea level rise. This image is a simplified version of the sea level rise spread from the Waypoints Connect publication. It shows the percent of road miles that will become inaccessible based on a projection of 2 feet of sea level rise. Some of our communities, like Deer Isle Stonington, which is shown here in the deep red polygons towards the center of the screen, are bridged communities. In the case of Deer Isle Stonington, a low causeway connects the islands to the mainland. With 2 feet of sea level rise, this causeway will be overtopped and impassable, effectively cutting off the island from the mainland. Vinyl Haven is here again towards the middle of the picture, and it can be seen that 6 to 10% of its roads will be cut off to emergency services on the island, which is the average for the coast of Maine. Our sea level rise data trail has been one that has effectively used localized knowledge and experience to inform a regional perspective for the coast of Maine. This work includes working directly in communities with those whose places of residence and work are being impacted. It also includes working with partner organizations and experts from around the world and understanding other localized contexts to see if lessons can be learned there and applied here, and vice versa. Through these connections, our data work on sea level rise has advanced, but so have outcomes for the communities. These connections have become a network of like-minded people supporting each other in combating a very difficult problem. The work we did with the Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee was beneficial for our data analysis work by giving us the opportunity to work closely with a group who are knowledgeable and passionate about addressing the effects of sea level rise at the local level. This work informed much of our other programmatic and data strategy work around sea level rise along the coast of Maine.
So what does all this mean? Data, studies, plans? Believe me, none of us want just another plan or study to sit on the shelf. We do see the value in having these things and the time in collecting the data. Along with the connections made through networking, our committee is working hard to recommend the right balance of tangible outcomes and continued data collection. The time to collect all this information provides great value when it comes to advocating for funds to actually implement the plans. Currently, our committee is working with our K-12 school to benchmark high tide events. We want to know the frequency and the magnitude that the flooding has impacted our roads and buildings rather than simply recalling it through memory. We are seeking funding to implement our downtown master plan improvements by raising roads and sidewalks to be at or above the 100-year flood line, protecting our water and sewer infrastructure from inundation and storm damage, as well as finding ways to mitigate storm surge on our main street. Those are all components of the master plan. We know there will be impacts to structures, so we are reviewing policy and ordinances that can help mitigate future flooding risks to infrastructure. Currently, we have a floodplain ordinance that requires certain design principles in different flood zones, and base flood elevation standards for new construction, but the ordinance does not take into account projections for sea level rise. We will look for ways to address the cost of flood insurance premiums to limit the impact on property values. This may include challenging the maps, flood-proofing designs, or participation in the National Flood Insurance Program's community rating system. As we think about the impacts on our island's businesses, we will also be looking for ways to facilitate the changes they can make to be more resilient to the flood risks. The commercial activity in our downtown area represents a significant percentage of the island's economy. With over 40 businesses, many of which are in the 100-year floodplain, and over 100 people employed through this area, it is important that we find ways to work with the property owners. As you saw in the video, Vinyl Haven's lobster fishery represents nearly 10% of the state's total catch. The majority of those landings are brought ashore from buying stations located along the downtown corridor, and thus an important consideration for any sea level rise adaptation or mitigation effort in the future. If I had not said it yet, lobstering is king on Vinyl Haven. We are the second highest valued port for landings in the state. There's over 200 lobster licenses on the island, with license holders age ranging from preteens to over 80 years old. Each lobster license holder can fish anywhere from a few traps to 800. And we estimate that 40 to 50% of our island's workforce is employed by lobster industry, the sole source of income for some families with multiple members employed in the fishery. Now, for those of you that have a natural resource-based economy, you can probably relate to the economic vulnerability this puts on our communities. Local and statewide efforts have been underway for the last few years to diversify the fisheries in Maine, as many see risks in relying on just the one fishery. Other species are brought ashore on Vinyl Haven, like scallops, halibut, and crab, but they pale in comparison and are mostly dealt with direct sales. Over the last 5 years, aquaculture has seen a growth at a small scale along Vinyl Haven shores, but the lack of a market and the low volume of harvest will require a significant investment to become worthy of supplementing our lobster fishery. While the lobster fishery is generally still at an all-time high, and as a few of our fishermen and women look to get into aquaculture, most of the threats to the lobster fishery are out of our direct control. Climate change, for example, has caused a shift in where and when the lobsters move. Shell disease has been seen and correlated to water temps and chemistry. Following the glut in 2012, state policies and laws have been discussed to regulate the stock. The state and industry realized the need to increase market demand and catch increases as the catch increased. So there was a partnership there, but there was more work to do. Lastly, federal rules and trade agreements also contribute to the dock value in the lobster catch. Concerns about unintended or incidental conflicts with other marine species has also concerned our fishermen and women. As a community and as a local government, we continue to keep a pulse on some of these things that appear out of our control because we acknowledge that there will be a big impact if any of these stressors increase. We look to our potential partners in organizations like the Island Institute to help us understand more about the things that we and others can do to be another voice advocating for the fishermen and women. Megan, at the Island Institute, what are some of the things that you and your colleagues are up to follow these challenges and work with the industry along the coast?
One of the biggest challenges we face is being a state with a small population of 1.3 million. Our communities are small and our islands have very small populations. This often means people try to overlook us and the contributions we make to the world. We may be tiny in population, but we are big in other ways. The lobster industry is one way we make a big contribution to the United States and the rest of the world. Last year, when we were working on this spread, we wanted to communicate how important the lobster industry of Maine is to the world and how connected Maine is to the rest of the world because of the lobster industry. This pie chart at left shows where lobster is caught in the United States. Lobster from the United States is caught mostly in Maine, with a couple of other states contributing to some of the total catch. The Maine brand of lobster is synonymous with high quality lobster. Anywhere you go in the United States, people know that lobsters are caught in Maine. This is also becoming well known in other parts of the world. The advancements made by processors and distributors means that lobster can travel to almost anywhere in the world. The bar charts at right show the exports of lobster around the world. The United States exported more than $600 million in lobster from July of 2017 to June of 2019. Lobster exports to China were previously steadily increasing as a percent of total exports until the recent trade wars between China and the United States. These tariffs have greatly decreased the amount of lobster being exported to China. This is a difficult time for the lobster industry to find a market for its product due to the coronavirus pandemic. 70% of lobster is consumed at restaurants, cruise ships, and casinos, which have been closed, meaning one less place lobsters could be marketed. And not reflected in these charts, but great news for the lobster industry, is a new trade deal with Europe, removing tariffs on live and processed lobster. Our work on this spread to create a compelling visualization of the importance of Maine lobster around the world and show how connected Maine is internationally because of its exports. The lobster industry is one example of how Maine might be tiny, but we sure are mighty. Our organizational mission is to remind the rest of the world that just because we are small, it does not mean we do not matter. Islands often get left out of the mix because they're seen as outliers, but by using data to show our relevance and importance, we show that islands and the coast of Maine should be counted and included. The map displayed here shows the top 3 ports in Maine for lobster landings by value. Vinyl Haven has consistently been the second highest port by landings, with $37 million landed in 2018. Our objective for all of our data work is to add value for our communities, whether this is giving them a way to fit into national and international conversations, show up at the state level to influence decision-making, or informing local community members. Vinyl Haven, with over 40% of its workforce employed in the fishing industry and a huge amount of lobster, these lobstermen contribute to total state landings, make it a major player in these discussions, and shows its relevance around the world. We try to use our data analysis to add value in any way possible for our communities.
So about the data. The data that's presented that Megan just shared helps us share this with the community, helps us share and see the changes of the fishery and the impacts it has on the community. It shows our productivity, even as small as we are, as she mentioned. When the data is paired with the influences that cause the fluctuations in catch or value, we also see how vulnerable we are. This can help us lead discussions about aquaculture and diversification of the fisheries. And we certainly have the boats, equipment, and the logistical support already in place for many of the ongoing endeavors. The data helps us provide an important context when talking to our state and federal legislative representatives about any policy solutions that could be explored. Most importantly, this data is just one piece of the puzzle. As we learn more and as the lobster fishery evolves, we need to be actively involved with data collection, communication with stakeholders, and the use of feedback loops to tie all of this together. We need to continue to ask ourselves, where are we going to go? Where do we want to go?
So we started the discussion today with me asking a number of questions, and hopefully by now you have a better sense of how the work that we're doing with communities along the coast is making a difference. I hope that you have a good sense of how we're trying to increase access to data to help communities better understand their realities locally, how we're supporting local leaders like Andy who are better prepared to engage in tough discussions about the future of their communities because of the data, the visualizations, and the storytelling related to it. And we now have an ability to bolster the standing of our very smallest communities at the state, national, and global levels. Making sure that Maine doesn't go uncounted, that our smallest communities are relevant in even the biggest global discussions. We've made progress in the last few years, but our work is not done. Right now, some of you may have been following the efforts around the census and the challenges of getting that done in the pandemic times. As an organization, we've been able to closely track participation at the zip code or community by community level to track participation response rates. And we have the ability through our networks to follow up on a pretty frequent basis individually within communities and then through social media to really encourage people to stand up and be counted through the census process. We know that that's critically important here in the United States in terms of funding opportunities and other other aspects that are really key to the future of our coast. We are also getting ready, as Megan said, we have the 2-year cycle around the Waypoints publication. Having released the Connect publication earlier this year, we're starting to think about the next one and asking ourselves questions about the ways in which data might help us to better understand the pandemic's impacts to our regions and the opportunities as we try to recover and prepare for continued change in our area. We're also looking for colleagues, to expand our colleagues in our networks around this work. And that's part of the reason why, of all of the topics we could have spoken about at the Virtual Island Summit, we wanted to come to all of you with a message about data. We are very much interested to learn more about the work of all of you on this call, to share more about our work, and to consider ways in which we might be able to collaborate to use data to tell the story of island communities globally, to increase their standing and relevance in key conversations around climate, trade, and other issues that are decisive, really defining for the futures of our communities. So we would of course invite you to follow up on all the resources that have been shared in the chat box and that are on Pathable or on the Island Institute website. You can download everything that we've shared today. We have a number of ways that if you'd like to follow along with our work that you can sign up to follow us through our newsletters or social media. And we are a membership-based organization, so of course we're always appreciative when people want to consider supporting our work. You can learn all of that, more about all of that on our website. So with that, thank you to Megan and Andy for getting this conversation started. We want to be able to turn it over to all of you. Again, if you haven't had the chance to put your questions into the chat box, please go ahead and do so. I know that we've compiled a couple of them already, and so I just wanted to start off with some of those. So I guess I wanted to start off with a question that Francesco from Scotland. It's nice to see so many Scottish colleagues on the line today. I know that the use of data has been a really significant discussion there as well to help the islands be better represented. So thanks for all of you for joining. We want to continue to learn alongside you. But the question around the ways in which the Island Institute or island communities are considering litigation to deal with climate change, seeking financial compensation as a legal remedy to fund coastal adaptation. So Andy Terrio from our staff shared around the Island Institute's perspectives on this. We're really trying to understand the causality linkages around all of this, and the Attorney General here in the state of Maine is starting to look into these issues. Andy, could you speak from the very local perspective? Is this a conversation that you're having in the Final Haven town office to understand you know, that causality piece, who can help you to pay for adaptation?
So far, no, it's not something we've talked about, but could certainly be on our radar and be more involved with as you guys learn more.
Great. There are some other questions that earlier on about what kinds of uses of the data have we observed in response to Waypoints. Hopefully you got a sense for some of that. A lot of it is with our policymakers and with public audiences in the press. We are able to use it pretty consistently as a tool to help national audiences usually to better understand the coast of Maine. It's great. One of our goals is to hear other people cite Waypoints data, and that does happen frequently. We feel like that is when we've done our jobs. Just yesterday, as an example, there's an active effort on the topic of climate change in the state of Maine, where the Governor Mills here in Maine has formed the Maine Climate Council. We're considering a number of recommendations to be made as part of that effort for this state to become more aggressively focused on carbon reductions and adaptation. And one of the sets of recommendations is that this may be hard for those of you to believe, particularly outside of the United States, but we don't have a uniform building code for our smallest communities here in the state of Maine, which seems kind of counterintuitive in a cold winter area, that we wouldn't be actually requiring homes to be built to any particular code around energy efficiency. And so one of the recommendations actually is to make building code enforceable for even our smallest communities. We have a statistics in Waypoints at a glance part of the recent publication that says that 75% of our coastal communities have populations of less than 3,500. and 25% of our coastal communities are actually less than 750. And so what this points to is not that Maine communities don't want to do the right thing on building code, but that it comes back to this capacity issue that Megan referenced, and that what is the resource to enforce building code in the smallest of communities, and who's going to pay for that? And so this is something that we've raised, not to say that this shouldn't happen, but that how can municipal budgets in the smallest communities support this additional enforcement piece? So using this data point has been really important, and it's something I've spoken to Andy about really frequently about how we can help position the challenges around this at a statewide level. Andy, I don't know if you want to add anything in particular on that particular topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think through that climate change work that Maine's been doing, we do realize that the transportation network and the building networks are the biggest source of carbon emissions, right? And our housing stock is old, and our resources are limited, particularly on the more less populated communities. And so, hopefully there's talks, with the state about how they can support the communities to make sure those things are enforceable and not see it as a means of punishment, but truly working towards making everyone more comfortable, making the houses a little safer. It's a lot of work, I think, to go from having not adopted the building codes to all of a sudden potentially adopting all of them for the contractors, for the homeowners, for everyone. So yeah, lots to learn there, and a lot of good opportunities too as well, if that's something that we can find the resources to implement.
Great. Megan, what are some examples that you've had where you've appreciated seeing Waypoints put to use?
I've had, my favorite are when people come to me with questions about the data and want to run what they see in the data by me, or find out if I have more data on a particular topic that they saw in the publication. One example is that we have a superintendent from one of our local school systems, who often comes to me for help with mining further into the census data to understand some of the nuances of his community.
Great. So Megan, there are definitely some technical questions that I'm going to direct to you in here. Let's see, maybe just some of your, there was a question about what you're actually using for analysis tools. So are you using spreadsheet models, Python, and would you be able to share your models as open source for other partners?
So my training is in spatial analysis, GIS. The majority of the work from the Waypoints Connect threshold or publication was based on GIS analysis. Most of it was done as a one-off type of analysis. It would be very hard to share the process in any sort of open source way, just because I don't automate it with Python or with anything. I'm just running it and then going in and looking for the anomalies, the outliers, the things that need to be corrected. We also employ an economist to help us with some of the analysis. He did the work with the import and export data, as well as, we didn't show it in this one, but our ports data. So the methods that he uses are, he used a location quotient for one of the spreads this time. And then some of the rest of it is just simple storytelling with data.
Another sort of somewhat related question on your methodologies, Megan. We've talked a lot about the limited data when we've got a small sample size. So there's a specific question here around how do you estimate income and occupation data for places below the census reporting threshold? So
we don't. If we have a community where we can't get that data, then we don't include it in the analysis, or it's included in the analysis in that we're doing a higher level. So some of the Casco Bay Islands are included as part of the Portland reporting area. for some of the census data, you can drill down to the census block level and find the individual islands, like Cliff Island is its own census block. So if they're reporting census data at that level, I can get a hold of it. But otherwise, the smaller communities then are included in the analysis and that they're grouped into the larger group. And then we won't report on the individual island at the smallest level if that data isn't available. On some of our islands, citizens have taken on survey projects of especially counting the number of people. The population number on islands is often contested because our islands are so small that people know everybody on the island and so can tell you how many people actually live there. And this number is likely to change from day to day, month to month, season to season. So whenever you give a number, even if it's a census valid number or not, it's always followed by the question, well, when is that from? When are you referencing? Andy talked about Vinyl Haven and that the census number is around, wavered between 1,100 and 1,500, but during the summer, we know that that population nearly triples, and that number is a lot closer to 4,000. So whenever we put our data into the Waypoints publication, we cite the source that it came from and the date that it was collected in order to help limit the amount of questions related to what it means.
And I would add that, you know, as we said, this has really only been a few years that we've been delving into being a little more hands-on and not just sort of taking what the census has to give us. And it's been a real exploration in data sets that are seldom seen or at least visualized in a way that people can make sense of them or use them. I think the last few years has really been around figuring out what's out there. And I'd like our work to move forward in a way that allows us to build collaborations that can do exactly what Megan's talking about and get a better sense of what the census maybe can't get at. So part of our goal of expanding our network here in the state of Maine and beyond is to identify synergistic research efforts that could collect the data that we're missing. And so as Megan mentioned, we've partnered with a number of other organizations, the Maine Lobster Dealers Association, the Nature Conservancy of Maine, to try to fill out the data sets that we're looking for to tell the stories that need to be told. There's a question here, Megan, around community-based data collection methods such as participatory GIS is more cost-effective and can help some data gaps and provide much-needed geospatial data for island communities. What are your thoughts on that?
So some of our island communities are using participatory GIS in their data collection efforts. I believe Vinyl Haven was thinking about one around sea level rise and collection of photos during storm events. But the Island Institute has not used any participatory GIS methods to collect data. For the most part, we are not collecting our own data. We are using partners' data or publicly available data, analyzing that and making that available for use.
Great. I think we've covered some of these questions already. Megan, if you just want to, there's another kind of detailed question. What unique and useful data do you get from public records of county or state agencies?
So the parcel data that we used in order to be able to do the economic impact analysis for sea level rise came from the state, the Maine Geo Library. Unfortunately, these parcels aren't available for all of the communities, but Vinyl Haven has been very up to date on getting their parcels available to the state, so that made it possible to actually do that analysis. Running through my list. We have a very cool broadband point density analysis in Waypoints Connect, and that's also based off of the Maine Geo Library roads and addresses. I do highly recommend that you check out the data notes section if you wanted to know more about where we get data from. It's in the back of Waypoints Connect. It lists all of the places that we pulled data from It gives the hyperlinks if available and talks about some of the specifics of when and what.
Great. Andy, I'm going to give you the last question, which is just a chance for you to maybe articulate some of the connections you'd be interested to make. There are folks here from around the world, and I know we really think of Vinyl Haven and your community as leading on a number of different fronts of preparing for the future here in Maine. Who would you like to connect with? Who might you like to learn from?
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, it'd be great to, we've talked about this with a couple of our committees around the sea level rise work, especially as we look for adaptive solutions. You know, there's a lot of you out there that around the world that are much further ahead than the parts of the US, and certainly we are. So to learn from some of those examples that you've implemented would be fantastic. Also around the concept of the fishery, right? And so that being our primary source of income and biggest driver out here, you know, are there examples out there, and how many of you have looked to diversify and been successful in that? Is that something that we could learn from as well? So on either of those fronts, would love to hear more from any of you from wherever you're coming from.
Thanks. So we'll move to wrap up. I'll just encourage you again, we've got some ways to connect with us here. You can find all of this on Pathable. We'll try to get on LinkedIn a little more often because James does such a great job promoting the event that way. And certainly the Island Institute website has a lot of information about the work happening here on the coast of Maine. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that you have found something of value in the work of the communities along the coast of Maine, and at least now know that they exist. We encourage you to stay in touch and hopefully someday come visit. We'd love to host you here and connect you to the good work that's happening. So thanks again to Andy and Megan for joining me here today, and for James and his team for putting on an excellent event. We look forward to staying connected. Take care.